Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. There's no question that the single most important job at this time of year is to deadhead. And do that at least once a day, and that just keeps new flowers coming through. And I love it. It's one of the nicest ways to get work done, but also just gently be intimate with the garden. But there are certain plants that can flutter slightly to deceive, and you can end up cutting off buds rather than spent flowers, and dahlias are the classic one. And there is one rule that pretty much applies to all dahlias. Where you have a flower that has finished and spent, you get a distinct cone, and that should be cut back. But where you have a round ball, sometimes it's like a cushion, that is a little round bud waiting to open. So if I cut that off, I've lost a flower, but that one can be removed. And if you do this daily, the garden will stay looking fresh and also keep that energy flowing. Because there's a real sense of summer slipping like sand through our fingers. And by deadheading and keeping new flowers coming through, we can cling on to it for just a little bit longer. Coming up on today's programme, Nick shows you how best to combine colours in your garden.
Here I have put together a live colour wheel, and I want to show you 3 different ways you can use it.
Adam is in Brixton to meet some firefighters who have transformed the roof of their station into a peaceful garden.
The best part of this garden is in the middle of the night, and you can come out here and no one bothers you, and the world is at peace, and it's lovely.
And I will be adding some fresh colour to the garden and also dealing with one of gardening's basics, how to make perfect compost. Come on, don't be sleeping, let's go. It has been a strange and at times difficult year for veg. Some things have been absolutely fine, but others have struggled. My pumpkins are just beginning to take off. I'm growing them up supports again because it worked so well last year, but they didn't show any signs of growth until about a week or so ago. Too hot, too dry, and they just hunkered down. But now I want to plant out a crop which is distinctly for winter. Chicory. And normally I'd have it all planted out by the middle of July, if not a little bit earlier. But this year, because it was so dry, I just kept them in their plugs, and it's not till now that I've got space and the conditions to put them out. But it's not too late, because this is a plant that I intend to keep harvesting right through till next spring. Now, chicory is one of those curious tastes. It's distinctly bitter. But if you use it in conjunction with sweetness or salt, it can be absolutely delicious. This is Rosa di Treviso. And although at this stage it looks like a fairly unremarkable green lettucey type plant, in fact it becomes one of the most beautiful vegetables that you could possibly grow, with wonderful crimson leaves that create a sort of cone shape, and as they emerge in winter, they curl at the top like a cockerel's tail feathers. But to get to that stage, you first of all need to grow a green plant with lots of leaves, and that feeds back into the root, and it's the root that then grows the red leaves that we eat. So all chicories, pretty much, other than endive, have 2 stages of growth. So in summer, you're really growing a root. Now I'm going to put the board down and just pop them in the ground wide enough apart so that they can get to be really nice leafy plants, because the more leaf they have, the bigger the root will be. So we'll just space those out like that. The house martins are being really busy. And I love this time of year when you get the young in their scores, wheeling and chittering and chattering up above. When the house martins and the swallows are at play, then everything seems well with the world. Because you want maximum growth, you need soil with plenty of organic matter. They like good drainage. And they are pretty much impervious to any cold down to -10. Although I do grow lots of different types of chicory, there's no doubt about it that Radicchio is my favourite, whether it be the deeper, darker red of this Rosa de Treviso or the round, slightly pinkier balls of Rosa de Verona. This is very much a winter salad. These won't be ready to harvest until late October at the earliest, and they're at their best November, December, January, and even February. And there's no doubt about it that in the middle of winter, to harvest a really vibrant, red, leafy vegetable is uplifting. And colour always matters in the garden. It doesn't matter what aspect. And how we combine those colours is the key to it. And Nick is here to give us some tips and advice on how to make the best of our colour combinations.
Our natural world is full of glorious colour, and nothing demonstrates the glory and seemingly endless variety better than plants. But with so many plants out there, available in every conceivable hue and tone, it's almost like a gardener's sweet shop, and it can be very easy to get carried away. So how do you choose? How do you narrow down the options and only select plants that, when planted together, deliver a feast for the eyes? You know, if you're nervous about using colour in the garden, there's a really simple technique and device you can employ, and it's called the colour wheel. It's something that designers use a lot. You can find versions online, but I've made my own. Here I have put together a live colour wheel with plants. Now, it's a little bit rough around the edges, but it gives you the core principle of what that wheel is. Basically, the electromagnetic spectrum, all the colours of the rainbow wrapped round into a circle. And I want to show you 3 different ways you can use it. The first one is using harmonious colour. And all that means is colours that sit next to each other on the colour wheel, so it could be a set of 3 or 4. And a great example is just here. So starting with the pale blue, it then runs through to a mid-blue and into violet. And those colours sit very easily together. In fact, you can take any chunk of the wheel and pick 3 or 4 different colours, and they're always going to look very happy sat together. Now, let me show you how that works out in the garden. This container planting is a really lovely example of how a harmonious colour scheme can work. And actually, pots are a great way to experiment with some of these colour combinations. This essentially takes the end of the violet sort of tones, and then runs into the pinks. So these 3 colours sit together very easily. And the added bonus for me here is that this pink flower has just the slightest flush of yellow to it. And so you get just a little bit of colour pop. What a lovely combination. A second approach that's easy to recognise and do in your own garden is contrasting colours. By contrast, I mean colours which sit opposite each other on the colour wheel. So a good example here could be this pale yellow coreopsis, which is sitting opposite the violet lavender. If you put the 2 of them together, a piece of colour magic happens. It's called simultaneous contrast, and those colours will look more vibrant because they're paired together. And you can literally take any opposite colours from the wheel. I really like the way that this planting is working. It's right on the edge of a vegetable patch, so there's a mix of ornamental and edible plants. But what gets me really excited is that they're all contrasting colours. So essentially, these yellows and the violets in the brassicas and these blooms over here are simultaneously contrasting with each other. So they're making each other look more vibrant. And because it repeats all the way through the scheme, the whole thing pulls together and creates this really exciting, vibrant, simultaneous contrast. There's one final way that I want to share for managing colour in your garden. That will do the job very nicely. It's a rule of three known as triadic. This approach is for the bold and the brave, and it's all about drawing a big triangle on the colour wheel. So, for example, if you start here by the red, draw a triangle out this way, you hit blue, then across here you hit yellow, and back to red. So that's the three primary colours sitting together, and that creates a really exciting association. So I've gone for a muted down lime, a muted orange, and a muted violet. Now, right in the centre of the bed, but for the back of this particular scheme, I'm going to put these hydrangeas in. They've got beautiful limey tone to them, and what makes them quite special is they take on different tones as they go through the season. So it starts as a darker lime and then slowly pales itself down as the months go on. Now, the next layer that I want to put in front of the hydrangea is this lovely pale orange crocosmia. And of course, it's not just the wonderful mix of the pale orange with the lime that I'm after, it's also that contrast of foliage texture. Now, the final layer that I want to put in front of these crocosmia is the scabious, of course. And it's going to be very happy in this spot at the front of the bed because it's a dwarfing cultivar and it loves the sunshine. So I'm really pleased with this. It's got that lovely triadic combination of the paled lime, the paled orange, and the paled violet. And all together, they create quite a vibrant scheme. It's not too shouty, just enough to grab your attention. So next time you're thinking about putting a planting combination together in your garden, avoid the higgledy-piggledy look, make use of the colour wheel, and tap in to your inner garden designer.
I do confess that I quite like a bit of higgledy-piggledy in the garden, but I absolutely take the point that even if it seems random, you have to be in control of colour. And one of the plants that reliably gives late summer and autumnal colour are penstemons. These are a North American plant. They start flowering in a normal year, round about July, and they will go on flowering, if you deadhead them, into autumn. And this is the time to take cuttings. And it's a good idea to do that because they're not reliably hardy. If you don't have good drainage, then in winter that is wet and cold, you can lose them. So I do recommend taking cuttings from penstemons over the next week or two. And if you don't have a penstemon, you can still take cuttings because if you go to a garden centre or a nursery and look for a nice big plant that's a bit shaggy, clearly past its best, here's one called Electric Blue, but it should be a massive flower. This is what you want to buy because it's great for taking cuttings. And when you do take cuttings, what you're looking for is new growth that doesn't have a flower. So, for example, it's something like this. A new growth and no flower bud in that at all. So there's one. Let's take that. So strip off all but the top pair of leaves and then just cut off just below a leaf node. When you reach the top, the best thing to do is just cut the leaves in half. And the reason why you're doing this is to reduce the transpiration from the leaves because obviously there are no roots to take up moisture, so If you have too much foliage, the plant is going to dry out before it can feed itself. I've got a pot of thin compost. I've added vermiculite to what is a basic seed coir mix. You're not looking for fertility. What we're trying to grow here are roots rather than lots of top growth. But I will just put them round the edge. And the reason is that they lose moisture a little bit less quickly because there is a film of moisture on the pot. Now, I need to water these in and not let them dry out too much. But like all cuttings, they will strike better if they have some warmth and the air doesn't dry out. A mist sprayer once or twice a day is the best thing you can do. And I would expect these to start rooting, and you'll know when they're rooted when you see new growth, in about 4 weeks' time, certainly before winter. And then I can put them somewhere protected, pot them up individually next spring, and plant them out into the garden about next May or June, when the last risk of frost has passed. But that's for next year. I want colour and I want it now. And there are plants like these lovely Nifophias, which not only are flowering now, but will go on flowering and be at their best throughout the next 6 to 8 weeks. So I'm going to add them to the dual garden. Come on. I've got various possibilities for planting a number of different Nifophia out. Nifophia cover a huge range of plants, but I've got one here which is Nifophia coalescens. What I really like about this Nifophia is that even when the flower is gone, the foliage is fantastic, which is why I'm putting it in the grass borders. I've got a hole here where I've taken out some thalictrums. Thalictrums like damp soil, and by and large, so do Nifophia. They come from South Africa, but most of them actually grow in quite wet areas. And they're hardy and therefore are well suited to a wide range of gardens. They need some drainage because they're most likely to have trouble if they sit in very wet, cold soil. This will grow at least twice as big. So I am going to plant one there and another one in this gap here. I will give those a really good soak, but not until I've planted the other Nifophias in the dual garden. Now, my other Nifophias are fairly similar, but there are two different types. And I've chosen this one because it's called lemon popsicle. Now, that is not a dignified name for a plant, but they're good, the whole popsicle series. They grow about a couple of feet tall, but they flower from July right through into November. Now, I've got already planted mango popsicle, which is this orange version. And I thought the two could work together, but I've got another one here. Same sort of look and feel, but a lovely acid yellow colour. Look at that. Isn't that good? It adds such energy to a border. Now, this is called Dorset Century. It's a little bit taller, and my thinking is if I put it behind mango popsicle, there, but quite close to it, that's perfect. So I'm going to pop that in. Now, what I am going to do is cut that spent flower spike off. And I cut it right down at the base. Cut that there. That can go. And then it will produce more flower spikes once the roots get established. Well, Nifophia will add some late-season fire to any border and any garden. Now, going from fire in the borders to firefighters. Adam has been to London to visit a garden made in an unlikely place by perhaps an unlikely group of gardeners.
I've come to Brixton to meet a fella that's a hero in more ways than one. When he's not dealing with emergencies, he's busy planting up green spaces right across London.
Blue Watch, Shin. Answer your names, please.
Simon Jakeman is the London Fire Service's Green Champion Coordinator. He has been a firefighter for 22 years. He's shown me around the Brixton station, one of the busiest in London, which gets up to 3,000 shouts a year.
Put your duties full out.
It's the start of their day. While the firefighters are busy downstairs, Simon wants to show me something above the yard.
So, this is what the roof used to look like.
Is it really? It'd been all right for the football, wouldn't it? But
Fantastic. So, up on the roof.
wow, I really wasn't expecting that, mate. Not in the middle of Brixton.
Fire station garden, a little oasis.
Over the 2 rooftop levels, the firefighters have created a mindfulness garden to offer a place of quiet contemplation. And it was all Simon's idea. How did it all start?
So, back at my base station, back at Surbiton, we had a fire station roof, nothing going on, covered in moss. And we decided, let's do something about this. So how this all started was with one fire bucket and a tomato plant.
The idea for the gardens has really spread across London. There are now over 50. How did it get to 50 gardens?
We had one of the senior officers turn up one day for a meeting. I was out there, a bit of water in at lunchtime, and then he said, well, let's get you out there and start inspiring and giving other fire stations a nudge. This garden actually won Brigade in Bloom last year, overall winner. We've now got stations trying to beat this garden. We've got a wildlife garden down by a canal over in West London. There's fire stations growing their own fruit and veg, balcony gardens. Even the Commissioner has now got a garden up on the 3rd floor of headquarters.
Do you know, there's a real sense of fun about this garden. The detail just puts a smile on your face. I really love the water feature. Look, they've used the couplings from the hoses to make the chute into the water. There's little gnomes that are firemen. They've even built a cricket pavilion here. And the whole place gives you that sense that they really care about it. It's the firefighters who tend the garden, in between shouts. Chris, so you seem to have got the title of head gardener here, mate, haven't you?
Yeah, that's true, yeah.
So
Matt's passed it on to me.
It doesn't look like you've wasted a thing here, mate. You know, everything's reclaimed.
Yeah, we've got the pallets, but obviously we've got the herbs in there, you've got the mint, the rosemary, the thyme. We've lined them. We put the flowers in the middle this year. Obviously you can water the top layer, it'll drip down onto the next line.
But even your benches and that, they look like they've come from the local park, you know? They've got that sort of concrete.
They've actually, I think, reclaimed from a pub that closed down.
And you think, ultimately, it's making a massive difference to people?
I think so. If this area didn't look how it did, you know, people wouldn't come and sit out here, and then you'd be sort of sitting in the fire station all day. You know, it's nice to get outside and sort of get a bit of fresh air. People will come out here, sit around that table, and that's what it's about. We sit together, we eat together. It is a second family.
The firefighters are called out day and night to all sorts of emergencies. Today I'm allowed to watch a daily drill. The hairs on the back of my neck stood right up. You get a sense of what they really have to deal with on a daily basis. But what does this give you, this garden, when you get back?
It's lovely to have somewhere to escape. Take 5 or 10 minutes, me time.
It's been a very bad incident. It's a good place to come down and sit with everyone, talk it through. It's our own little therapy session at the end of the day.
I find it quite therapeutic. Enjoy coming out here at the start of watch, checking my veg, giving them a little water. It gives us somewhere to come and tend to, and you know, somewhere you can come and reflect, and yeah, you can see the fruits of your labour, if you like.
Yeah. I love the way you've put your potatoes in a few old bits of wood.
Yeah, well, just trying to build it up, use anything we've got. I mean, I call that guerrilla gardening.
Yeah, exactly.
The best part of this garden is in the middle of the night and you can come out here and no one bothers you and the world is at peace and it's lovely. Get your head back into gear, ready to go again.
Fantastic. The mindfulness garden is clearly important to these guys, and Simon has received the British Empire Medal in recognition for his work in helping gardens like this to flourish. In my books, he really is a hero amongst heroes.
It just shows you can make a garden absolutely anywhere. And gardens work on all kinds of levels, not just on the purely horticultural. But this is pure horticulture because I'm actually planting out some colchicum bulbs, which have sort of large crocus-like flowers in September, October, and even into November. This is a variety of colchicums called Dick Trotter, and it's not too late to plant them. If you plant them now, they will flower this year. And I'm putting some in a pot, although you more normally see them planted out in grass or around trees. And although these are autumn bulbs, and they're going to give a fairly quick response, it's time to start thinking about planning and buying your bulbs for next spring. And particularly so this year, because I have heard that as a result of the summer, bulbs are going to be in short supply. Not just varieties, actually, bulbs across the board are going to be far fewer, so get your orders in early. Now, these I'm putting in, as normal, pointy end facing up. And one of the things I particularly like about growing bulbs in pots is you can cram them in. You can really get a mass effect and then obviously move the pot where you can enjoy that result. And then, when they finish flowering, I can think about planting them out into the garden. But for the moment, just cover them up like that. Give them a good soak, put them somewhere reasonably sunny, and they will start to grow very quickly indeed. Now, still to come, Carol celebrates the Monada, one of the stars of the late summer border. But first, we're off to Cheshire to join Kelvin Archer, who is a record-breaking grower of gooseberries.
I got into gardening as a young boy through my dad, really, because my dad was a farm worker and he was keen on growing vegetables in our country garden. We used to water and help him sow the seeds and pick the vegetables, and then we used to take them to local shows and show the vegetables. So I got into it from an early age, really. Right, OK, Dad, if we roll this net back. My real passion in gardening is growing gooseberries. The reason I started growing gooseberries was because it was a village tradition and all the local villagers showed their gooseberries once a year at the annual gooseberry show, and I just thought it was fascinating, so I tagged along and did the same thing. I'll pick all these off this side first, and then I'll come round that side in a minute. Just have a look at that one, Dad. There's nothing wrong with that one, though. It's not bursted or anything, is it?
No,
okay.
It's all right.
All right. Grow gooseberries simply to try and get the heaviest gooseberry in the world. My biggest achievement was to achieve the world record, which I got in 2013, and it was compared with a large hen's egg. I've got a rough idea in your head that that gooseberry is bigger than anything that you've ever grown before, but until that goes on the scales, you've no idea if it's going to beat that world record. But when it actually tips the weights and it starts balancing, then you know you've got that world record, and then you think, yeah, well done.
41 pennyweights, 11 grains, a new world record.
I was absolutely overwhelmed because I thought that record would never get beaten again. It's just really amazing. To get a world record gooseberry, you've got to be dedicated. And before I got it, I was obsessed. And it meant not going on holiday. We didn't go out at weekends, or if it rained, we couldn't go out because of covering the gooseberries, so we never went anywhere.
They're his #1 priority. We've even had to miss school sports day so that he could be at home to cover and uncover the gooseberries. I hate them. I've never liked them.
There you go.
Yeah, that's all right.
Nice, aren't they? Just feel how right that is, though. Just feel how soft it is. See how...
Very.
So tomorrow will be show day, so we all harvest them all tonight, which is called the Getter's Night. And a getter is someone who's selected from your show to come and watch you pick your gooseberries, and then you've got to go and watch him pick his gooseberries, so they're called getters. And what the getter does, he has to make sure that you pick that gooseberry off that tree, and you're not picking one up off the floor, which you could have had from anywhere else. Which you think is going to be the heaviest one?
Not long.
Oh, you're right, Dad. Right, Dad, so we'll put this one in first. And then your getter then watches you put the gooseberries in the box. He then seals it with sealing wax and string. And then I go round to my dad's and we'll do the same with his gooseberries. My getter is my dad, but there's no cheating involved there because we're both the fiercest rivals, and some year I'll come first and my dad will come last, so people know there's no cheating involved in that. Gooseberry growing for shows has been going for hundreds of years. It first started in the early 1800s, and in those days there were hundreds of shows all over the country. But now it's dwindled down to just 8 shows in Cheshire and 1 show in Yorkshire. The perfect gooseberry is a gooseberry that's as big as you can possibly get it without it bursting, because you're not allowed to show a gooseberry that's bursted, but they can be any shape whatsoever, because some of the gooseberries are long, some of them are round, they're oval, they're all different shapes. So it doesn't matter about the looks of them, it's just purely for the weight. The first thing that we do is start weighing the twins. Then we get on to the main prize, which is the Premier Berry. The person that won the show last year had to send his gooseberry onto the scales first, and then it's up for everybody else then to see if they can beat him. And whoever knocks him off, then they're up there to be fired at again by somebody else. And we just keep going through until we find out who's this year's champion. The gooseberry growers, I'll tell you all sorts of stories of the things that they feed the gooseberries on, and I don't really believe any of it. Some of them will say that they give them Guinness and beer and put jam around them and sugar. I've never tried anything like that. Oh, no, I wouldn't be secretive with something like this. No.
Hiding something?
No, I'm not hiding anything. So when the boxes were open today, I could see that last year's champion John Porter's berry came out of the box, which looked a really good berry. I get excited, but more nervous than excited. It's like a nervous tension.
Kelvin's on.
You're always apprehensive in case somebody has got one, you know, a lot bigger than yours. Everybody says they've got no gooseberries, and all of a sudden you see a great big massive whopping gooseberry across there.
Winner, Kelvin Archer, 29 pennyweights dead.
Absolutely brilliant because of all the hard work that I put into them this year. It's like a year's work, so I'm delighted. There's always next year, and that's what we all aim to do, to try and beat the world record next year.
I love everything about that. Absolutely fantastic, and long may giant gooseberries continue to be grown. There is absolutely no risk that they're going to be grown in this garden, however. I am growing some here as cordons. They produced a few fruit, but certainly not record-breaking. But in time, it's a good way to grow gooseberries. It's been a funny old year for soft fruit. Quite tricky, actually, because most soft fruit doesn't relish the kind of hot, dry weather we had. Summer raspberries, for example, have been bad, quite frankly. Small crop, rather dry, rather tasteless. You win some, lose some. The blackcurrants were great, but they're finished now. And when your blackcurrants finish, that is the best time to prune them. They produce their best fruit on second-year growth, but as the growth gets older, after 3 years, it gets less and less productive. So what you're looking to do when you're pruning is to take out the oldest wood. If you've got an old blackcurrant bush, one of the things you can do very successfully is just cut the whole thing flush to the ground. New growth will come back. Then you can start to thin it out. Welcome to the beating heart of Longmeadow. This is the single most important place in the whole garden because it's where we make our compost. It's very easy to make good compost, and also there is no one right way. If it works for you, then you're doing it right. So what I can do is tell you a few basics and then the way that we do it here at Longmeadow. The first thing is, compost is not a process of just decomposition. It's mainly a process of digestion. There are unimaginable trillions of creatures that are at work eating the raw material that you put into a compost heap. So you need to encourage the best conditions for those organisms. The second thing to understand is that a successful compost heap is made out of a roughly constant proportion of material that is high in nitrogen, which is fundamentally green. So you could take, for example, a rhubarb leaf. So that is pretty high in nitrogen, or a dried up leaf like that, which is high in carbon. But you do need plenty of brown material to make that green rot. Otherwise, it's too high in nitrogen and you get a sludge. And you'll find all packaging, brown paper of every kind, egg boxes, really good for adding carbon to the heap. And almost all kitchen waste can go on, except any meat, any fat, or anything that has been cooked. Because apart from anything else, they will attract vermin. And what we do here is add everything onto this collective heap. And then once a week, we shred it. Now, if you haven't got a shredder, and I didn't have a shredder for about 20 years, you can mow compost. And that increases the surface area and makes it much easier for the bacteria to work. It then goes into here. I can tell you it's quite warm in here, and you can see there's a kind of grey mould. That's a good sign. What it means is that fungus is already at work. But that is quite hot. And that heat comes entirely from the creatures digesting this. But after about a month, the heat will die down, and then we turn it into here. And by this stage, the compost is getting much more recognisably compost-like. That's still not quite broken down as I'd like it. There's a plant label got in there, not surprising. It's amazing what turns up in compost heaps. But when you turn it, you get air in, and that provides oxygen, and the bacteria like that, and that gets turned into here. And that looks really scruffy because we've covered it with cardboard to keep it drier. But the cardboard is being digested and becomes part of the heap. That is ready to go to the final bay, which is there to be used. Now, we've nearly used up all this, but if I go into the compost cave, I can come out with a handful like that. If it's at all sludgy and yucky, if it smells bad, it means it's gone anaerobic, there isn't enough oxygen. And you need that oxygen for the bacteria to work. The best way to do it, just turn it. Turn it again. Other than that, that is going to go onto a border. And the crucial thing it's doing, over and above improving the soil structure, is it's adding bacteria and fungus to the soil. And that relationship between the fungus and the bacteria in the soil and the roots of plants is the secret to plant health. That can go back in there. Now, don't be intimidated or put off by the scale of this setup. This is a fairly large garden, and we are fanatical about making compost. Now, all our gardens are full of many different kinds of plants, and they're all an expression of our individuality. But I reckon that few of us are sufficiently aware of how much work goes in to the creation of these plants. And there are a group of people who spend a lifetime working behind the scenes, creating the plants that we love. And Joe has been down to Stockbridge in Hampshire to meet one of these plant breeders.
I've come to Hampshire to meet a real unsung hero. Now, this man has made a lasting impression on the world of horticulture, but also made a huge impact in our gardens too. And if you don't grow one of the plants that he's created, they will be in a border very near you. Peter Moore is one of the nation's leading plant breeders who has introduced many new and exciting cultivars of our well-loved garden shrubs. Without Peter's hard work and dedication, our gardens just wouldn't look the same. Peter, when did you first start gardening?
Started gardening about 9 years old, and I was given a small plot of ground in the garden to grow sweet peas, like lots of young children, and became sufficiently interested that I thought I'd like to do it as a career.
And what about your first hybridisation? That must have been an exciting moment.
Well, yes. I was responsible at the end of the 70s looking after all the seed that used to come in from around the world. And there was some seed that came from America, Choisya arizonica, the first time that this seed had come into the UK. And when it flowered, you could see it was something specifically different. And so I used Donata as the mother plant, and the arizonica I used as the father plant.
OK.
And I did that in 1982. In 1989, it was launched at the Chelsea Flower Show. And the rest, they say, is history.
And what was the name of this plant?
Choisya Aztec Pearl.
Aztec Pearl. The rest is history, isn't it? I mean, it's an incredibly successful plant. I remember when it came out and everyone wanted to get their hands on one. So basically, you've introduced about 20 plants to the market. Which of those have been your big hits, shall we say?
Choisya White Dazzler, more compact than Aztec Pearl. Flowers twice a year, piles of flowers.
Where Hebes? You've done some Hebes?
Yes. And probably the best of the ones is lilac quartz. This is a nice compact form, ideal for a pot or in the garden.
So when you create a new plant, you're trying to improve on something or offer something different?
Different,
because there's
different.
so many plants out there on the market anyway.
Well, totally different, like the Budria, berries and cream, where the flowers are actually variegated, so you've got pink and white on the same spike, and totally different to any other Budria.
And how does it make you feel when you go into somebody's garden and you see one of your plants?
That makes it all worthwhile, basically, isn't it? Well, I haven't got a family or any children, so my plants are my babies, basically.
Right, well, let's go and have a look around your garden, have a look at some of these fabulous plants that you've created over the years. This is a beauty, isn't it, this? Lovely Budlia. What's this one called then, Peter?
This is Budria Unique.
Is it? Oh, and what's so unique about it then?
Well, it's a hybrid of Alternifolia. Alternifolia flowers on the previous year's growth in June and only flowers once. This flowers in July and carries on to the end of September, October.
So how have you got this to flower on this year's growth?
I can't tell you that.
You can't? Really?
No,
You're serious? You've gone all poker-faced on me. Are you serious? You can't tell me that?
No, it's confidential.
Really?
Yes, yes.
OK.
Top secret how I managed to achieve this new, unique form. This is Spirea, sparkling champagne.
What have you achieved from this plant that hasn't been achieved before from a Spirea?
The flower was the main object.
Yeah.
There's quite a few spireas that have good foliage in the spring, but the flowers are just plain pink. I used a species called Haitiana, where the flowers are white with red stamens, and by transferring that pollen onto one called Magic Carpet, I've achieved a plant which has good flowers and good foliage.
Yeah.
Up here, Joe, we've got Choisya Royal Lace, an excellent new introduction with fine foliage, In this situation, it's got lime green leaves because it's growing underneath a tall robinia tree. But in the other part of the garden, in full sun, the leaflets are pure gold. Has flowers in the spring, highly scented, and again, to a lesser extent, in the autumn.
OK. It is very fine foliage, isn't it? Amazing, actually. Is that the idea with choices, to grow them as fine as possible, getting finer and finer and lacier and lacier?
That's correct on this particular variety.
Gardens are getting smaller, aren't they, generally? Are you trying to make plants more compact and sort of thinking about how much space people have?
Oh, yes, yes. I mean, that's quite important.
That's
So it's
a
an
good
ideal plant, basically, for a pot on a patio, and it won't get nowhere near as big as traditional choices. So, Joe, here in front of us, we got a new Miniana hybrid. This is hopefully a world exclusive.
Ooh!
All the flowers are double.
Yeah, it's really nice, isn't it? A very elegant flower. Great colour as well.
And as you can see, there's plenty of flowers coming.
I feel rather honoured to get an exclusive to one of your plants, Peter.
We're looking for a new name for it.
What about Buddleia Peter?
Sounds good, doesn't it?
Yeah, I knew you'd like that one, yeah. And Peter, thanks for showing me around, looking at all your plants. Now I've seen them here, I'm going to start spotting them everywhere, and I'm going to know where they came from.
Yes, yeah.
It'll be from you, Peter.
OK, fine. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
It's always good to see behind the scenes and to be reminded that there are real people spending the whole of their working lives creating these wonderful plants that we tend to take a bit for granted. Can I have the basket now? There's a good girl. Right, if I have the basket, you can have the ball. Good girl. One of the temptations when chilies and peppers are beginning to look really good and decorative is to leave them on because they look good and decorative. But actually, there is a perfect moment to harvest them. And the more you leave on ripe fruit, the more it inhibits both the ripening of green ones and also the production of new flowers. It's a bit like deadheading, is if we take off those that are ready, we will stimulate further production. And these can go on producing right till Christmas time. So we can really expect a bumper crop. And this year has been fantastic for chilies and peppers. They have loved the heat. This chili is a new one for me. It's called Apache. Now, all these green Apaches will ripen much quicker for losing the red companions. And hopefully, if I keep feeding it, I'm giving it a seaweed feed once a week, we'll get more flowers and therefore more fruits for weeks and hopefully months still to come. To keep the colour going in our borders for weeks and months, we need to work with the change of seasons. There's no doubt about it. And Carol has been to Pembrokeshire to visit a national collection of monadas and celebrate them in all their glorious diversity.
Oswego tea, bee balm, horse mint, bergamot, a multitude of names, but a singularly beautiful plant. Originating from central and eastern regions of the USA and from southeastern Canada, the elegant and dramatic monada has made its way across the Atlantic and is now one of our most theatrical midsummer plants. Monadas are part of the family Lamiaceae. You can always tell members of that family, like salvias and mints, by just grasping the stem. It's always square. Another thing that distinguishes monadas is these pairs of leaves. They're always opposite one another. And they're lanceolate, which just means that they get wider in the middle, they're fairly long, and then they come to a point at the ends. As for the flowers, they're really exciting. They're not petals. Each one is an individual flower. And if you look carefully, you can see that each one has its own apparatus. First of all, there's a stigma, which protrudes furthest. So that's the female bit that's going to receive pollen. And then underneath it are the anthers. And deep down at the base of this flower is the nectar. They're pollinated by the long-tongued bumblebee, and it can penetrate right down here. But short-tongued bumblebees also come in, but what they do is they cheat. They come to the bottom of the flower and they pierce the flower and they can get at the nectar. In their native habitat, the species will set seed. That's how they spread themselves around. But these cultivars, sadly, are sterile. No seed from them. In its native habitat, it's from places where the soil is rich, where there's lots and lots of moisture at its roots, so include loads of organic content when you're planting them. And don't mulch too deeply, because these are plants that move out across the surface of the soil. And if you want your plant to look pucker for ages and ages and to go on flowering right the way through the summer, then what you want to do is deadhead regularly. Because cultivars seldom produce seed, and to guarantee you've got a clone of the plant you want, there are 3 ways to propagate monadas vegetatively. The first is fertile around just under the surface of the soil until you discover stems that have already started to root. Detach a rooted piece, pot it up in free-draining but moisture-retentive compost. Put it in a cool, sheltered place. When you see roots coming from the bottom of the pot, you know it's time to put it into the garden. Another way is to take cuttings. Choose fresh, unflowered shoots. Cut above a leaf node so the plant will recover. Well, because these cuttings are very soft and green, I want to take them as quickly as I possibly can. First of all, cut right under a leaf node like that. Remove that bottom leaf. This is the place which is going to make roots most easily. And then I need to nip out the top. And then just make a little hole in the edge, up to the base of those bottom leaves. Never have any of the leaf under the surface of the compost, because that'll make the cutting rot. So just one thorough watering now. Stand them in a shady place and have some patience. Although, on the whole, monadas are strong, healthy, accommodating plants, there is one complaint that some of them tend to suffer from, and that is powdery mildew. It becomes covered in this sort of white deposit, and there's one main cause for it. Plants become prone to this when they're too dry at the roots, so it's vital to keep them really well watered. It won't actually do the plant any harm. What you can do at the end of the season is cut the whole thing down and don't put them onto the compost heap. Then, in the spring, when they start to sprout, stay on top of the watering and every so often give them a good feed with liquid organic feed. It's not actually a fungus preventative, but it will make your plants grow big and strong, and they'll be much more resistant to mildew. One of the ways to avoid powdery mildew is to grow fungal-resistant varieties. This is one of the best examples. It's called Jacob Klein. This has to be one of my favourite varieties. It's Beauty of Cobham. It's a very old variety, and it's the parent of lots of modern cultivars. What's particularly charming about it is the contrast between the pale pink flowers and the dark calyces, bracts and stems. One of the alternative names for monada is Oswego tea. So called because the Native American Oswego tribe used to make up a brew from its leaves. It's a practice that they taught a lot of the American settlers too. And many people started to drink this, but for me, the reason for growing monadas in our garden is just for this wide range of vibrant colours and the exotic and outrageous nature. of these show-stopping flowers.
Well, I'm absolutely with Carol. I grow monadas for colour, and they are really useful in the latter parts of summer to give that boost to the garden. So I'm adding monada, and not just any old monada. This is one called Pink Supreme. I don't know if it's supreme, but I do know it's very, very pink. If I add it into the border like that, immediately it brings life. Right, whilst I get the rest of these plants in, here's some jobs for you this weekend. Mint is flowering like mad at the moment. So reduce half your supply right down to the ground and trim off the flowering heads of the other half. Give it a good soak. This will stimulate fresh growth from that which you've pruned hard, but while you're waiting for it, you've still got some leaves to pick. If you grow any kind of brassica, there is a real threat from the caterpillars of the small cabbage white butterfly. And these are particularly hard to see as they are beautifully camouflaged against the green of the plant. So really have a close look, pick them off and dispose of them. Unlike hybrid teas or modern shrub roses, the old-fashioned shrub roses like gallicas, centifolias and damas have largely finished flowering. So now is a good time to give them a light prune. Don't be anxious about this. Use a pair of shears and just trim the straggly growth to shape. The cobia scandens, which forms the centerpiece of this pot, is coming into flower. And it has lots of really lovely phases of its flowering. So the buds emerge looking very unbud-like. They're sort of arrowheads. And then slowly these open out, and from it appears the early stages of the flower, and then finally you get this, a cup sitting in a saucer, hence the cup and saucer plant. And I also like the way, and this is purely by accident, that it has grown into the clematis behind it. This is Clematis viticella floriplena, which is a mouthful, but it is one of the oldest clematis in cultivation, certainly in the UK. And between them, they're really a beautiful combination. Well, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. Next week, we are back on Thursday night at 8 o'clock. And remember that this is a bank holiday weekend for all of us except for those of you in Scotland. So enjoy as much of it as possible in your garden. And I'll see you back here at Longmeadow next Thursday. Till then, bye-bye.